Hello and good morning, good afternoon, wherever this might find you, and thanks for joining us on today's webinar, What GivingTuesday Data is Telling Us About Effective Fundraising. I'm Nicole Jones from TechSoup, and I'll be your host today. So we've got a lot of great things to cover today, but before we get there, let's do a little bit of housekeeping on how to use ReadyTalk. So if you have any questions, comments, you can use the chat box and drop them in. We will respond to those during our Q&A session at the end. And then all lines are muted, so we are not able to hear you. So again, chat box is the space if you have any questions or comments. And if you lose your internet connection, you can reconnect using the link that was emailed to your new confirmation email. And for all upcoming and past webinars, you can find them on the TechSoup website, and that link is included on the slide. And you're also going to receive an email with this presentation recording and link, so anything you missed or you want to go back and get a refresh on, you'll have access to all of that. And of course, throughout, we welcome your tweets. We're at TechSoup, and you can use the hashtag TSWebinars. This webinar is brought to you by TechSoup, a global network bridging tech solutions and services for good. More than 1.1 million nonprofits in 236 countries and territories have benefited from TechSoup and recognize TechSoup as their unique resource partner. And this is made possible with the support of more than 100 corporate donors and providers of software, hardware, and services who have chosen the TechSoup platform to grow and create impactful in-kind donation programs. You can learn more about our great offerings for changemakers like yourself by visiting our nonprofit tech marketplace at TechSoup.org/get-product-donations. And these will all be included in your chat box, and you'll also get an email, again, with a recording to this and any important links and resources. But TechSoup is also more than just a tech marketplace for getting great deals on software and hardware for your nonprofit. We also offer online and offline communities to foster collaboration and peer learning opportunities, in addition to useful tech resources and tips through TechSoup's free blog, webinars, forums, and articles. That, plus our Apps for Good division, where we collaborate with experts to create and curate relevant solutions that help communities around the world. And that's called Caravan Studios. The division of TechSoup, if you haven't heard of it, I highly recommend it. It's called Caravan Studios. And with that, super excited to hop into introductions. So on today's webinar, we're joined by Woodrow Rosenbaum. He is President and CEO with Intent. And as a data and insights lead on the Global GivingTuesday team, Woodrow is working with donation processors and other stakeholders around the world to evaluate donor behaviors using his experience in consumer analytics to uncover the levers for increased individual giving, which is why we're all here today, right? He's got lots of great content to share with us. So stick around, and he's joined by me. I'm your host, Nicole Jones. I'm Director of Communications here at TechSoup, in addition to Stephen Davidson, who will be helping to answer your questions along the way. And with that, I'm super delighted to hand it over to Woodrow for today's presentation. Welcome, Woodrow.
Thanks, Nicole. It's exciting to be here. Thanks for setting this up. I love talking about this stuff. So I'm going to kick this off, I guess. So as Nicole said, I'm the data and insights lead for GivingTuesday Global. My job is to measure the movement and increasingly to understand what we can learn from this about how and why people give and how to motivate more generosity. We are working with about 60 data platforms, donation software companies, fintech companies, payment processors in the US, and dozens more around the world, as well as with teams in 50 countries to understand how to motivate more giving. And I'm going to talk about how GivingTuesday has helped us to understand some of this stuff, some of the key findings from our work over the last couple of years, and where this is going. But first, you should see a poll up right now. It would be really helpful for me to get a sense from you, the audience, of how many of you have participated in GivingTuesday before, how how familiar you are with the movement will help me kind of know how much to cover. I can see, wow, look, lots of answers coming in. Give you a couple more seconds to let me know. Have you done a Giving Tuesday campaign? Have you participated yourself in any way in the past? Okay, so about 2/3 have. So that's really great. That's very exciting to hear. Hello?
Yeah. Oh yeah, I just skipped to results so people can see on the screen yes and no. There it is.
Great. So that's really, really helpful. Thanks. And I'm really glad to see that a lot of you have some familiarity. So some of what I'm going to give you in terms of the overview of the movement won't be new to you if you're familiar. But there's some important things to understand about what the movement is and how it's been created to help sort of contextualize some of the research and learning that we've done over the last little while. So first of all, as probably everybody knows, Giving Tuesday was originally conceived in 2012 as a day for giving back after Black Friday and Cyber Monday. The concept was very simple, and I think that's one of the keys to its popularity and growth. We have 2 days for consumption. What if we had a day for giving back? And it really wasn't meant to be any more than a celebration of giving that first year. And there wasn't really ambition for the kind of growth that this spurred. But this open platform really led to something much more profound and far-reaching than we had ambitions for in the early days. That concept that anyone, anywhere can give turns out to be pretty universal and gets expressed by people in lots of different ways and has really kicked off a kind of chain reaction of giving across the country and around the world. Interestingly, what was initially really conceived as a kind of a day for nonprofits to engage for support certainly it is that, but has grown to be something really about the participants and the people who are expressing their generosity in many, many different ways. And some of the ways that we see that emerge is through communities that are coming together to co-create and to celebrate Giving Tuesday. From the really tiny, like Bethel, Alaska, who have had a Giving Tuesday community campaign since before we really even called them that, to statewide campaigns like Georgia Gives, and obviously everything in between. We're now at about 200 Giving Tuesday community campaigns in the U.S. alone. And one of the interesting things that's evolving there is that it's not just geographic communities anymore. We are seeing communities of cause communities. We're seeing communities of color and culture coming together. So lots of different ways that people are expressing their support for whatever the community is and however they define it. And this network and this interconnected group it's allowing for the rapid adoption of ideas and best practices. This is an example of something that came out of Baltimore originally. It was called Love Notes to Baltimore, and the night before Giving Tuesday, people just went around the city and wrote little notes of encouragement and kindness to the people of Baltimore. And that idea was picked up in Kenya, where the team that leads Giving Tuesday Kenya saw it and thought, this is a really good idea, and they had adopted it and called it Nairobi Rocks and had volunteers paint little messages of hope and generosity on rocks and plant them around the city for people to discover. We're seeing small business get involved in Giving Tuesday in lots of ways. This is an example of small businesses in New York who got together and put on their volunteer hat for the day and all gave back in various ways. Giving Tuesday is about giving in lots of different ways and about celebrating generosity in lots of different ways. And I'll talk about what the data tells us about that. But this is another example of a kind of not a typical fundraising campaign. This community center decided that they would take the day to just thank past donors. And so they got volunteers and their board members, and they came together and they distributed lists, and they just called people up and they said thanks, and they never asked for any money. And they also happened to raise $1 million that day from those donors that they were calling back to just say thank you to. So an example of both a really amazing celebratory experience, but also happen to be a really good fundraising approach. We're seeing lots of creativity on Giving Tuesday. This is the president of Tadlock Roofing, a roofing company in Florida, and he put up a matching gift and said that if it was all used up by Giving Tuesday, he would jump out of an airplane, and this is his Giving Tuesday selfie jumping out of the airplane. We literally see thousands and thousands of little creative celebrations all around the world every Giving Tuesday, just like this, and it's pretty exciting to see. One of the keys to that happening is the fact that Giving Tuesday is not a typical giving day. It doesn't happen on a platform. It's not funneled through one place. And this is what has allowed it to kind of grow so exponentially every year. We have measured Giving Tuesday activity in every single country and territory around the world. That includes Antarctica and North Korea. So this broad-based grassroots, that's driven by people who are just picking it up and deciding to do something with it. They don't have to become partners. They don't have to sign anything. They just do something. We also now have over 60 quote-unquote official Giving Tuesday country movements. And like those community campaigns, this is organizations, groups, coalitions, and individuals who come together in a specific country to be the stewards of the movement in that place. And following that same ethos of tools, not rules, these teams provide best practices, opportunity, amplification, and engagement for anybody and everybody who wants to get involved in their country. And that group of leaders that's growing, this is us at our leadership convention last year, they are sharing ideas, best practices, and information with each other every hour of every day, all year long. There's always somebody awake, and it's been a really this interconnected peer learning network has been a huge driver for change, engagement, and innovation in the sector, because it allows for really rapid adoption of best practices. Somebody frequently, including some of our partners like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, will tap into this group on just simply WhatsApp to say, we're looking for examples of this, or has anybody engaged this organization, or what's a model for doing something? And within hours, we'll get dozens and dozens of responses from all around the world. And it's been really an effective way of growing the movement and our capacity as a sector. And the movement looks different everywhere around the world. So it is about generosity and it's about giving. And those really seem to be really quite universal concepts. Our Romanian leaders put it that people have a fundamental human need to give back, and that Giving Tuesday is an opportunity to express that. Within that context, though, in different cultures and in different places, it looks a little bit different. In Singapore, it's a week-long experience with engagements throughout the city, little giving hubs on different themes where businesses, individuals, schools, and nonprofits come together to give people different types of engagement and opportunities to give back throughout the city, throughout the week. In India, we have the only country so far out of our 60 plus that does Giving Tuesday on a different day of the year to coincide with a giving festival, and has really become integrated into that week-long experience, and has been growing quite substantially, engaging people in more specific ways that have to do with bringing new ways of giving into the Indian culture and context. In some places, Giving Tuesday is much, much less about donating money and more about donating things. Barbados is an example of that. They don't really have an e-commerce structure in Barbados. There's very little digital giving opportunity. So we see book drives and blood drives, and it's been really interesting to see in those places, similar to East Africa actually, where the primary expression of generosity is by giving things, what that means for engagement and what it means for getting support in those environments. Giving Tuesdays is becoming bigger and bigger every year, and it's a big media opportunity. We see it in national media everywhere that Giving Tuesday is active, and that media story is growing year over year. It really has become the time of year that people talk about generosity and celebrate it. This is an example of all of the logos of our global community. There are no rules about how you adopt Giving Tuesday, and there's certainly no brand rules. The only rule really is that it's not a branded experience in terms of the organization supporting it don't put their brand forward. And organically, every single country that has signed on has decided to use this heart logo as the key symbol of their expression of Giving Tuesday in their community, which we think is it's not something we ever insisted on. It's not even something we really actively encouraged. It just organically occurred. So I'll point out. So I'm going to talk about our data work and our global collaborative, what we've learned along the way, and what we think it really means to nonprofits about how to engage for support. Try to get some actionable insights for you today. I just want to add that feel free to add questions as we go. We may take those as they come up, and I want to make sure that we cover what's useful and interesting to you guys. This data collaborative is now enabling understanding around the world, and part of the way we're doing that, as I said, 50 plus countries and 60 collaborators in the U.S. Is collecting aggregated data about people's giving. So we've got 10 years of transaction level donations. We've got crowdfunding campaign data. We have workplace giving data. And we do an original survey research to contextualize what we're learning from that transaction record to understand what really are the motivators behind some of the effects that we're measuring. So as I said, add your questions wherever you want, but I'm not going to pause here for questions. One of the things that we were really looking at over the last month as we started preparing some of these reports and highlights for the sector in advance of Giving Tuesday was that every time we answered a question, we really what we did was spawn 10 more questions. And that process actually is kind of the success story of this. When we're doing our job well in this research, we tend to generate more questions than answers, and they guide us along a path of discovery. And, we all know that children ask a lot of questions, and it's been known for a long time that that's key to their learning. It's been estimated that on average, kids between the age of 2 and 5 will ask 40,000 questions. Some recent research that I discovered when I was looking into this idea of questions being kind of a guiding force was that adults too have used questions in a really particular way in terms of brain science. When we ask a question, it actually changes how we begin to process information immediately following that question. It primes us for learning. And it got me thinking about the fact that the right question can really be a profound influence on your success. And likewise, asking the wrong question can guide you in the wrong direction. And from my commercial marketing background, there's an interesting example of asking the wrong question, and that's diapers. So a major diaper brand that you would all recognize, where I can name it, asked consumers, what is the most important factor when choosing a diaper? And unequivocally, what consumers said was that absorbency was the most important thing. And that brand, and you may have seen it, did a lot of advertising about the effective absorbency of their diapers. And what they found was that their market share fell. And it turns out that if you dig a little bit deeper, what you find is that by and large, people trust the best, highest selling diaper brands to be absorbent. So when you message about that, you're not really messaging on a differentiating factor about your diaper. What matters then is to talk about the other benefits, elastic legs and easy close tabs and Minnie Mouse on the patterns on the diaper, those sorts of things that can differentiate your brand. And it's not that the answer to the question wasn't correct. It just wasn't the right question to guide them in the right direction. It sent them in the wrong direction. So likewise, asking the right question can really set you up for success and sometimes can really inspire profound effect. This is an example of that. This is Jennifer Lamb Dubois and her dad Edwin. And this is an example of how a question can be quite powerful because in 1943, Jennifer was 3, and her dad took a picture of her at the beach. And Jennifer asked, "Why can't I see the picture now?" And that question inspired Edwin to invent Polaroid film. Now, not every question we ask is going to set us up for some kind of profound, groundbreaking, world-changing outcome. But the right question really can help us at least to pragmatically focus on getting an impact and steering us in the right direction. So I'm going to talk about some of the questions we've asked, the answers and new questions that they've led us to, and some of the questions that we're asking right now that we don't have answers for yet, and what I think the actionable findings are from each of these questions and answers that we've discovered so far. So first of all, we started this project not to understand giving and how to inspire more of it, not to change and fix the real significant gap in philanthropic data around the world. We started this project because we wanted to understand how much money is being donated on GivingTuesday. It wasn't really any more complicated than that. Our situation in this sector is pretty poor. Our data, we don't have access to a lot of good data, certainly nothing like what my commercial clients have access to. And in GivingTuesday, that problem's that much bigger because we're not processing any of the donations, so we don't have any direct access to any of the actual results data. So we asked donation providers or donation processors to provide data on their results for the day. And it really wasn't anything more than that. And we've seen it's a pretty big day. So last year in the US alone, online only, in 24 hours, over $400 million was donated on GivingTuesday. That doesn't include the day before and day after. It's not from every source. It's nothing that's offline. It counts every monthly gift at its face value without a multiplier. So we know that this is a fraction of the total giving. Nevertheless, it has provided us with a benchmark for the growth in donations on the day, which are substantial, and it shows that GivingTuesday is pretty big. It's a big day for donations to nonprofits, and that's great. That was really good to see, and it gave us a benchmark and understanding of what the growth in the movement looked like, and that served its purpose. But as we started to be able to get more granular data from those providers in order to answer questions like where in the U.S. is this giving happening, we opened up an opportunity for a little bit of a deeper understanding because how much is given doesn't actually tell us what the actual impact is. So the next question that we had was, is GivingTuesday generating a net lift? You're going to have a big day, but for a lot of people in the sector, the fact that giving has been flat or declining for so long has led us to believe that we actually have a fixed maximum amount, that we've capped everybody's giving out, and that donor fatigue is setting in, and we can't get anybody to give more. There was in fact an assumption for many that if you got people to give more on one day, that almost by definition meant they were going to give less on another day. So we went back to our data providers and we partnered with an organization called DataKind, who work with nonprofits to use data science for social good. That was supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we acquired and aggregated that first data set of over 10 years of transaction level data, which allowed us to do the statistical model to answer this question. And what we saw was that for donation behavior, GivingTuesday looks a lot like a natural disaster. We see a big uptick in giving that is sustained, that we essentially return back to baseline. It doesn't cannibalize the rest of the year. So as a result, we see an overall increase, and that effect has been growing year over year. We just recently actually worked with our team in Mexico to do a similar analysis. They brought data scientists from around the country together in Mexico City, collected data from donation processors there, and saw the same effect, that we see this big uptick in giving on natural disasters and on Giving Tuesday, and then a return to baseline. And that's generated about 75% of Giving Tuesday donations are from people supporting organizations that they've supported in the past. So to us, this really suggests that this idea of donor fatigue is overblown. The baby isn't tired of giving. This baby is tired of the same old message all the time, and that we can in fact give people to give again and to give more if we engage them in ways that are effective. One of the interesting patterns we see in Giving Tuesday is that online giving is growing on Giving Tuesday faster than on other days of the year. So this is a clean time series of online donations in the U.S. going back to 2010. And as you can see, at the end of every year on December 31st, we have a big spike in number of donations. By 2016, Giving Tuesday was as big as December 31st and is now the biggest day of online giving, bigger than every other day of the year. In fact, it looks as though it's acting as a catalyst to drive more organizations to adopt digital. This isn't necessarily true on every single platform, certainly not for every single organization, but the overall trend is that online giving grows faster on Giving Tuesday than at other times. Understanding what the impact was and seeing that this was driving a net impact, we wanted to then understand how are people participating in this movement. And this again, I think, underlines, we've looked at this in lots of different ways, but there's some key insights here in terms of how to engage for support, not just on Giving Tuesday, but more generally, and what might be driving that net positive impact. And the key thing here is that although in about half the countries that we measured, and certainly very strongly in the U.S., giving money is the most common way of participating. But most people do more than one thing. And the vast majority of donors are also taking some other action. And I think this is particularly striking given that the majority of the campaigns are simply a monetary solicitation. And despite that, the donors, the supporters themselves, are choosing to give in more ways than one and choosing to give not just with their wallet. And I think one of the learnings here is that donors, supporters want to be treated to a more experiential engagement and less transactional. They don't want to be just thought of for their wallet. And that these other ways of engaging, when they have the opportunity, they actually prefer that. So this isn't additional burden or additional ask, it's additional opportunity for them to express their generosity and to celebrate it. I think this is particularly true perhaps for younger adult donors, but generally speaking what we see is people want to engage in lots of ways. They want to feel part of your mission. They want to feel part of your success. They don't want to just be a transaction in your donation register. The other thing that we see is that Giving Tuesday is engaging younger donors. Now, these are aggregated results for 21 countries, so that isn't necessarily comparing apples to apples. In the U.S., though, we see the similar pattern. In fact, in every country you see a similar pattern. In the U.S., the number is a little bit different. About 64% of people who are aware of Giving Tuesday participate in some way, and that's about 76% for those 18 to 34-year-olds. But regardless of the actual numbers for each of those categories, everywhere we've measured, every single year we've measured, Giving Tuesday is particularly engaging to 18 to 34-year-olds, a millennial supporter. And this is, I think, really interesting because what we hear from a lot of nonprofits everywhere we go is that it's really hard to engage that donor. We don't know how to get millennials to get involved. Well, it turns out it's at least possible because they're driving a lot of this Giving Tuesday effect. They're getting involved in Giving Tuesday at a higher rate than anybody else, so something's working for these donors. So to understand that, we looked a little bit deeper into their attitudes, values, and behaviors. And some things really stand out. So first of all, contrary to what a lot of people believe, millennials have more favorable attitudes towards generosity, giving, and the charitable sector. They're more likely to say that they that that they have a responsibility to give back. They're more likely to say that they were raised to help others, and they're more likely to say that they trust nonprofits. Interestingly, they're also more likely to say they enjoy giving. These are all attitudes that are highly correlated with donation behavior, and yet this group donates less. So understanding that won't surprise anybody. One of the key negative drivers there is that they have less money. I think more critically, even when they have the same level of discretionary income, they still report feeling more financially stressed. And that is the key negative driver on their behavior. And unless you're an organization that actually works on fixing that problem, mostly outside our control. Another factor that is mostly outside our control is that they're less religious. And religiosity is a key driver of donation behavior right across the board. Now, that's mostly outside our control, as I said, but there are some things we can learn from that. Religious donors are more likely to say they get asked a lot. Religious donors are more likely to say they have an example, they can benchmark, and they have an understanding of how much their peers give. And those things are also correlated with donation behavior. So I think there is an opportunity to tap into that in order to employ tactics and strategies that generate some of that. Another factor I think that is really important to understand about these younger donors is that although they have all these more favorable attitudes, they're also less likely to say that they make giving a priority. And to me, this suggests that what we need to be is a lot more proactive with that donor. And maybe that's part of what's working on Giving Tuesday. This is one of our next questions is to test this hypothesis. But we're getting out there, we're being engaging, we're being proactive, we're meeting them where they are, we're engaging on channels where we can find them, and it turns out they show up and participate. So I think that's an important thing to understand. They want to give. We also see that monthly giving skews young. Monthly giving is a greater component of the Giving Tuesday experience than on other days. So there's a big opportunity here to engage a supporter who wants to give to you and maybe doesn't feel like they can afford $100, but they're accustomed to subscription models and they can afford $10 a month. And most organizations would prefer a $10 a month commitment to $100 today. So thinking about that there is an opportunity here and that these donors are absolutely under leveraged. I think that there's a lot more we get from them. Our goal is to leverage this best practice from Giving Tuesday to help organizations engage those donors all year round. So we saw that, as I said, about 3/4 of the donations on Giving Tuesday are from organizations or from people who are supporting organizations they've supported in the past. And we also, in our surveys, heard from participants in Giving Tuesday. In every country we measured, the majority said Giving Tuesday inspired them to be more giving. And we were curious, does it actually impact their giving behavior? Do they put their money where their mouth is? And what we found first looking at those existing donors was pretty interesting. So we divided these into two cohorts by donation amount. So you're looking at a chart of donors who were giving under $400 a year on average. We saw this pattern I'm going to describe in every single cohort that we examined. And then we divided them up by the year of their first Giving Tuesday donation. So the first year that they gave on a Giving Tuesday, and this is highlighting the 2015 cohort. So the yellow line is these donors before they ever gave on Giving Tuesday, and the green line is those same donors after their first Giving Tuesday donation on 2015. And this is what we see consistently with every group we measured, is that after their first Giving Tuesday donation, these donors dramatically increase the frequency and value of their giving to those same organizations. Their giving is supercharged after that first donation. And so this is really interesting because this is showing that organizations are successfully leveraging these existing donors for more value and are breaking through the quote-unquote donor fatigue. As I said, every question leads to another question, or every answer leads to another question. Our next question is about better understanding what the cause of that effect is. What are those organizations doing on and after Giving Tuesday? What are they saying? Who are they engaging? What channels are they using? What are the actual tactics that are getting this impact? Some of it is probably greater utilization of monthly giving. We don't think that it can account for all of it. So over the next year, we're going to be examining more closely how those organizations are driving that impact for every single donor group we've seen. Nevertheless, it's very clear, post-Giving Tuesday, people increase their giving behavior. We were also interested in looking at the Giving Tuesday acquired donors, and this part was quite surprising to me, because when we set out, we knew already that donors on Giving Tuesday were giving to more organizations on that day than they tended to on other days or on a typical day. And as a result, I actually expected to see lower retention rates. And so we looked at this a few different ways. For example, in this chart, what we looked at was those Giving Tuesday acquired donors versus donors acquired at other times of the year to see how much variability was there in their portfolio of causes year over year. And what was surprising to us is that we found that those Giving Tuesday acquired donors tended to stay more loyal, had more stable, even when they grew, more stable portfolio of causes that they supported. They didn't mix and match. They didn't defect as much as donors acquired at other times. Other platforms have seen similar effects. These are some charts from Classy. The y-axis isn't labeled because the actual numbers are proprietary, but as you can see, they compared Giving Tuesday donors to donors acquired on December 31st and donors acquired during disaster relief efforts, and they found that those Giving Tuesday donors had much higher retention rates and were giving to more organizations and were really the best source of time on Classy's platform for new donor acquisition. We have since done sort of more straight up retention analysis on our own aggregated file from multiple sources and found similarly donors acquired on Giving Tuesday are more likely to give again in the year following their first donation than donors acquired at other times of the year. So we are, likewise are really interested in understanding our next set of questions on what's driving that effect. But it's great news because what it suggests is that we do have lots of hypotheses about what's going on there. But what it tells you is that you can expect to get a better return on investment from your Giving Tuesday efforts than other times of the year, that there's something really effective there to tap into. So that's Giving Tuesday donor behavior. In order to contextualize that, we wanted to understand how are people giving more broadly, and what are their attitudes and behaviors? What about modes of giving? To sort of get a baseline of behavior to compare to. And some of the key, this is an 80-page report, some of the key findings I think are really important to understand because I don't think they are well understood within our sector yet. First is this idea of donors being either online or offline donors. And what we found is that although most of the money in the U.S. is coming in from traditional giving, like giving to a nonprofit directly on their website is exactly as popular a behavior as giving by check, even though giving by check delivers more of the money. And critically, the most valuable donors are doing lots of different things. The donors don't segment themselves by online or offline. It's not a driver of the behavior, so it's not really a question of people are only one thing or another. Another thing we looked at was this idea of replacement behaviors. Crowdfunding for personal causes like somebody's uncle's cancer surgery. And I think surprisingly to some in the sector, what we discovered is that the people who participate in those personal crowdfunding campaigns are actually more generous to registered charities than other people. And they're also more likely to say it's important to give back. It's also they're more likely to say that they were raised to help others. They're more likely to say they enjoy giving. All of those attitudes and values that are correlated with positive giving behavior. These are our customers. Their generosity behavior is not really about, it's not about competition. If you think about it from a scarcity mentality, yeah, somebody has $1 to give. If they give it over here, they have less to give over there. But that's not really how it works. So what we should be thinking about is, what is so effective about these campaigns that is tapping into people's desire to give, How is that triggering the positive action we're looking for? Because those people are also more positively inclined to give to you, registered charities, as well as their friend who needs that help. The other thing we see is that Giving Tuesday is a time when there's a lot of research being done into nonprofits. These are GuideStar search results. Last year, 3 years in a row, GuideStar had their biggest day ever for people looking up information about nonprofit finances, their spending, their fundraising results, their missions. And whatever you think about sort of the role of that information in the fundraising landscape, I think it's really interesting to see that this day is when people are doing the most research and the most thought is going into where people are going to provide their support. So there's a conversation to get into, and the conversation is with generous people, and people are generous. Generous people give, and that sounds obvious, but we often look at it the other way. We think about, oh, I don't want to ask that person, they already gave. Or I don't want to ask that person, they already got asked by me or by somebody else. As a commercial marketer, this is exactly the opposite of the way we look at it. The people who are spendy are likely to spend. If you want to predict somebody's behavior, ask them what they did in the last 30 days. We need to think about this more from a commercial marketing perspective and recognize that these generous people are our customer, and what we're giving them is an opportunity to participate. So a couple of thoughts on how to make sure you're tapping into that opportunity and making the most of Giving Tuesday or any other campaign that you embark on. So we asked organizations if they set a specific and measurable goal. And what we found is that those that had set that goal were much, much more successful than organizations who had not set that specific and measurable goal. I think it works on a couple of levels. Key to this is when you set a goal and think about how you're going to measure your progress toward that goal, it immediately sets you up for success, because in order to measure your progress, you need to think about what channel am I going to use, what information is going to flow from that, what am I going to be asking people to do, and all of those things align you on an action plan to actually get where you need to go. It keeps you focused and it gets you to be really actionable and specific in your tactics. We also see that an aspirational goal in and of itself can really inspire people to support you. And we definitely think you should communicate goals based on the impact that they're going to have. We want to feed, here's Jennifer, she got school lunch, and as a result, she's president of the world, and you can help us on Giving Tuesday because your $9 donation will help us feed 5 more Jennifers, as opposed to we want to raise $10,000 today. Nevertheless, aspirational goals, things that are exciting to people, helps them to see how they're going to be part of your success, how they're going to be a part of that, feeling good about reaching some really important milestone. And if it's just a run-of-the-mill goal, it's not inspiring. It's not interesting to get to do business as usual, right? What's interesting is to do something really extraordinary. And I think in general, but particularly on Giving Tuesday, you kind of have permission to reach for the stars. And if you make 75, 80% of a really aspirational goal, that's an exciting win. If you make 100% of something that just seems like run-of-the-mill, that's not very inspiring. A good rule of thumb, we think, is to think about it this way. It should be achievable. You should think about what your conversion rates are going to be and who you're going to reach out to and how many people, and come up with an idea of what's actually physically possible. And then if you're worried about it, if it's going to keep you up at night, if you're not going to sleep until the day after Giving Tuesday, then you're probably in the right ballpark. That's possible, but it's going to give you butterflies in your stomach. My colleague Jamie McDonald, who is the strategy lead for Giving Tuesday Global, says the gut check is if it gives you butterflies, but you're not going to throw up if you say it to your board of directors, then you're probably in the right ballpark. So to get that goal setting right, start from what you want to achieve, link to your mission. Think about how you're able to measure, what resources do you have, what sources of data do you have, and then assign some specific metrics to that success. Metrics, I think you want to think about both what tells me if I was successful, but also what will tell me if I'm on track for success. What's going to give me an early indication of what's working so that you can course correct before the end of your campaign. You're not just measuring what happened in the rearview mirror. So here are questions to ask yourself when you're setting up your campaign, your goals. What is that main objective? How are you going to measure success and your progress to that success? And then how are you going to communicate your goal connected to your mission and your outcomes, both before and after? Really important to let people know what they helped you achieve. That's part of thanking them and making them feel good about that success, as well as what you're going to want from them next and how else they can get involved. So if you ask yourself those 3 questions, you're really on track for setting up a campaign that's going to be focused and successful. This is particularly true, I think, if you've got really limited resources. We see organizations that are smaller and have limited capacity actually do a lot better on Giving Tuesday than they do on an aggregated basis, on a yearly basis. They're really punching above their weight. So there's great opportunity here. You don't have to do a lot, but there's an opportunity to make sure you're not missing out on the big time when everybody's thinking about generosity and giving. So if you ask yourself these questions to focus on something really specific, it can really help you do something that's effective but also really manageable within your meeting. So I've been talking a lot. I will pause here to see if there are any questions that have come in while I've been talking. Any questions about what we've learned, what it means for you, how we've acquired any of these insights or data, any questions about how to leverage this for Giving Tuesday campaigns or anything else. Now's your chance to chime in.
Yes, that's right. Thank you so much, Woodrow. And yeah, just a reminder, you can type your question into the chat box and we will get to those. You know what, I have a question, if we could start with mine. I'd love to know, Woodrow, like how far in advance, let's say for a small to medium organization, maybe 40, 50 people, how far in advance should we really warm up our community to Giving Tuesday and that Giving Tuesday is coming?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I mean, there's no one-size-fits-all to any of this, but a couple of things that we've seen that kind of work. First of all, a kind of typical cadence would be around now, end of October-ish, is just you start talking to your supporters about Giving Tuesday is coming, Giving Tuesday is a thing, this is what it's about, like educating people on the experience, right, to help seed that ground. As you're doing that, if you've really thought about your goal setting, that means that as you get into November, you can be specific for each of your audiences about how they can get involved, right? So when you have that specific goal, then you can break it down and say, well, this is what we're going to ask of our board. This is what we're going to ask of volunteers. This is how we're going to go out to lapsed donors. This is how we're going to talk to donors from last year. This is how we're going to talk to our volunteer board, whatever it is. That in November you can start talking about it's coming, this is how you're going to be able to get involved. Texas A&M did some research in testing matching gifts, which was kind of interesting because what they found was a fairly complex set of conditions that they tested, but the thing that did best was going out with a message 5 weeks in advance, which was a little further in advance than a lot of people were kind of doing their communication. Kind of indicated that there's an opportunity to start talking earlier than you might think about Giving Tuesday. And that kind of cadence gives you a month and a half of communication to make sure that people are really warmed up.
Excellent. Thank you. Great. And some more questions are coming in. And I see just a question about getting the PowerPoint. Yes, we will send, of course, the recording, and we will also send a link to the PowerPoint or a attachment to the PowerPoint, so you will have that at your disposal. All right, so question here. What suggestions could you give for Giving Tuesday efforts for Senior Community Center? So this might be a little specific. But if anything comes to mind, Woodrow, please feel free to hop in. So it's suggestions that you would give for Giving Tuesday efforts for senior or community center when perception may be that seniors are not as tech savvy to donate online.
Right. So I think two things there I would say. One is that don't assume that Giving Tuesday is only online. It's certainly not. I mean, even though the majority of the campaigns are online solicitations, almost as many people volunteer as donate in the U.S. So people are doing stuff that isn't online giving. The other thing I would say is don't assume that the seniors are not that online. It's easier and easier to give online, and increasingly those seniors get pictures, like how they connect with their grandkids and see images of them is Facebook, for example. So there are lots of opportunities, I think, to engage them increasingly in online opportunities. But I would say think about something that's not online giving. Meet them where they are. Give them other opportunities to give. Some of the really interesting things we've seen with seniors is where youth organizations engage with seniors to support organizations. And that has been super inspiring, often driven by the kids. And that kind of engagement can be connected to an online crowdfunding campaign or not, and provide lots of opportunity to engage that doesn't necessarily require a 90-year-old to know how to connect their bank account.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, next question here. Has anyone looked at the engagement of GivingTuesday donors? Like what kinds of things do they do and how many hours? And also in giving things instead of money, how do you take and track pledges for in-kind donations? Is this being studied?
Great,
yeah, that's a lot.
Right, great. Yeah, great questions. We are right now really embarking on a much deeper understanding of those other modes of giving. Most of our analysis has been on financial donation, not because we think it's more important or care more about it, but because it's more inherently measurable. But we are working actually with our South African and our Swedish partners to build a whole new methodology for measuring volunteer activity and actions and correlating that with other behaviors and getting some really empirical measures of it that we look to then adopt in the U.S. and in other markets. And we're similarly looking at in-kind and informal donation in a number of markets, including the U.S. We're really only just beginning that. What we do have now is a good understanding of not so much the empirical, how many hours are volunteered, but how many people are doing that as an action on Giving Tuesday. And volunteering is the second most common thing people do on Giving Tuesday in the U.S. And as I said before, really important to understand, most people are doing more than one thing. Most people are not just giving money. And part of that, of course, is their people's choice and what they're choosing to do, and part of it has to do with how much opportunity we give them. I think that, as I said, donation, we haven't tapped out people's donations. I think that's even more true for in-kind giving and volunteering, because despite the fact that that's the minority of campaigns, we still see a huge number of people that are showing up and taking those actions on Giving Tuesday.
Great. Thank you. All right, next question here. Do you know if the Giving Tuesday converts give more to additional organizations, or do they increase their donation to like one or two?
So in aggregate, the answer is yes. So we saw existing donors would increase their giving to those same organizations that they were supporting. So somebody's giving to the Red Cross year over year, and then they give on Giving Tuesday, and after Giving Tuesday, they're giving more and more often to the Red Cross. We also see that those Giving Tuesday acquired donors, it looks like they have a tendency to add charities to their pool of organizations they support, but still stay loyal to those organizations that acquired them. So it's of both.
Got it. All right, I think we've got time for one or two more questions here. Let's go to this question. Is it better to have one Giving Tuesday campaign or multiple campaigns for the same nonprofit? For example, our nonprofit would run a Giving Tuesday campaign on our social platforms, then encourage our volunteers to share that campaign instead of creating their own on their own Facebook or other social media.
So there really isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to this. I think that for peer-to-peer, encouraging people to set their own thing up and reach out on their own channel can be really effective, because those peer-to-peer donors are largely given to the fundraiser as opposed to the organization. If you can connect that to a broader campaign and message and objective, that can really help to inspire people to feel like they're part of something big. Look at Movember for a perfect example of how that works. Individual fundraisers, team fundraisers, all rolled up into results on a single platform. Like that kind of approach, I think, is really allows you to get the best of both worlds.
Great. Thanks, Woodrow. And let's go to one more question here. You mentioned that Giving Tuesday donors tend to give both money and non-monetary gifts. How can we ensure that mentioning the needs for non-monetary gifts won't detract from donors making financial gifts?
Well, I mean, the best answer to that, I think, is that I think donors want to give in lots of ways, and you want to give them lots of opportunities to give. You want to inject some urgency to act, and that's one of the things that Giving Tuesday provides is that urgency. If you want to be part of the fun, you got to give today. But I don't think we need to think of it so much as an either-or situation anymore. A little bit of choice is helpful. It doesn't mean you're going to get everybody to do everything, but you can also be, I think, less afraid to give people the next way they can give back, and the next way, and the next way, including giving their voice, which is critically important for younger donors in particular, who have an innate understanding that their voice has value, and giving their voice and advocacy to your organization is one of the ways they want to give back to you. So I would suggest be less worried about this or that, and give people options, and give them a whole ladder of engagement that they can embark on.
Excellent. Thank you, Woodrow. Yeah, great words of advice there. There's definitely multiple sides to go about this, but you shared with us a lot of great data, some powerful insights that have come out of Giving Tuesday. So thank you for that. And now it's time for you, if you haven't answered a question, or even if you have, for our attendees, if you can please share just one thing that you learned today, and you can go ahead and type that into the chat box. That helps us know what information you kind of picked up on and what you're going to be taking back to your organizations as well. Something else that gives us a hand and makes our events or future events continuously better is by completing our post-event survey. So that'll be coming at you shortly and via email. And lastly, please don't forget to follow us on social media. That's where you'll get all the updates on upcoming webinars and other resources specifically around fundraising. And we've got a lot of great Giving Tuesday content rolling out right now and certainly into the giving season. So that's where you're going to find out about it first. So make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram too. We've got a presence there. Here's some upcoming webinars coming. So we've got on October 28th, next Monday, it's Cybersecurity Month. We just had a live stream, and it's on our Facebook page. If you want to look at the recording, we've got another live stream coming up on Facebook. It's security tips to protect your nonprofit's data, and it's going to be with Michael Enos. He is our Director of Community and Platforms, and he's going to be opening up the hood of TechSoup security and sharing with you our best practices and different solutions and software, hardware that we have to keep our data safe. And then October 29th, we have a webinar on choosing the right QuickBooks software for your organization, followed by November 12th, one on impact investing with Kiva and our Director of, or I should say Vice President of Development, Ken Sonoda. So this is going to be a really interesting one. We're also going to share some lessons learned from our direct public offering there. So lots of great webinars coming up, and you can check that out on our communities page to sign up. Just a couple more great resources for you. So you can check out our TechSoup courses, and I know Stephen has plugged those into the chat box. It's a social learning platform, and it provides nonprofits and libraries with just-in-time solutions-based training. And I'm going to flip to a page in just a moment with some specific courses on fundraising. But we also offer a range of services at TechSoup to help your nonprofit better implement and manage your technology. So from things like emergency tech support to strategic planning and fully managed IT services, our offerings are designed to meet the needs of all types of organizations. So back to courses, we've got some specific ones on fundraising. Again, it's giving season, so now is a great time to check these out. These are just a sampling. Oh, it looks like I have Adobe ones on there. Well, you can go to our courses page, and that'll be plugged into the chat box. You'll also get an email with that. But some of the courses that we have around fundraising are Intro to Communication for Fundraising. We have one on Fundraising Software Seminar Series, and then one on Social Media Marketing 101, How to Get Started with Social Media for Fundraising for Your Nonprofit. So please do check those out. And a note that, oh, do I have the code in here? Let's see, yes, we do have a 10% off TechSoup discount code for the course of your choice. So you can use it on any of those fundraising webinars or fundraising courses rather, or we have a slew of other courses as well, from design to social media, Google Analytics. Check out our full courses catalog. It's really excellent and with great prices. Can't resist. Great gift for your team as well. So please use this code. It's FY20Web10. And that will get you 10% off a TechSoup course of your choice. And with that, Woodrow, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Have a great Giving Tuesday, everybody.
Woohoo! Yes, happy giving season. And with that, it's time to say goodbye. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.